So a few words about COVID in the region. It's been fascinating to watch, heartbreaking in many ways, the response in Israel and Palestine. The initial response from Israel and Palestine to the coronavirus in March and April was swift and relatively effective. There was clear, strong leadership from the top and actually fairly good collaboration. And the economy was locked down and the number of infections and deaths from the virus remained relatively low. There was an outbreak in Bethlehem in March, you might have read about, probably spread by religious tourists from Europe, but this was contained and they flattened the curve in Palestine all the way through mid to late June. The biggest risk was from Palestinians who worked in Israel and returned home when Israel declared a state of emergency in the second week of March. But these workers were effectively quarantined and did not result in widespread community transmission. And then on March 15th, Israel and Palestine instituted sweeping lockdown measures. And Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister, announced that all people would, quote, need to adopt a new way of life. Schools and non-essential businesses were closed, gatherings and events were canceled, and there was high levels of compliance, both in Israel and Palestine. Unfortunately, testing was still not widespread. Then also on March 15th, Israel launched a phone app that every person who was in self-quarantine was required to download on their phone. And the Israeli military and the police used the app for contact tracing and to surveil people who were in quarantine. And it actually seemed to be working for a short period, but then the police stopped their aggressive surveillance. I'm not sure why, but it seemed to be a solution, but really was kind of abandoned. And then during the spring, both Israel and Palestine struggled with religious and cultural traditions that contributed to the spread of the virus. Some Orthodox Jewish communities disregarded the rules during Passover in April and still do flaunt the rules. And there have been outbreaks in a number of Orthodox neighborhoods. That challenge definitely continues today. And then there were several large Palestinian weddings held in defiance of the lockdown, and those resulted in outbreaks in Jerusalem and the West Bank. But the economic damage from the lockdown in Palestine was felt immediately, and it's devastating. The economy in Jerusalem and much of the West Bank, as you probably would imagine, is heavily dependent on religious tourism. And of course, no one is traveling to the Holy Land now, and no one knows when people will be ready to get back on airplanes and buses. So the disappearance of the tourism business could last for years, and it touches everyone in the region. The Diocese of Jerusalem is doing all it can to support the people employed at its institutions, and they're providing emergency support to the most needy families, but there's virtually no safety net to provide payroll support, unemployment insurance, food or rent relief, and there's just a limit to what the diocese can do. So I fear that families throughout the Holy Land are going to suffer financially for a long time to come.